There was a time when I believed the kitchen could keep a family stitched together. The aroma of cumin and browned onions, the quiet puff of steam from a just lifted lid, the clink of a wooden spoon against a favorite pot. These were the sounds of love to me, not words, never loud declarations. Just a table set on time, and the soup never scorched. That was how. I showed my care. So when my son told me they were all coming home for the long weekend, him, his wife, and my grandson Liam, I felt something stir in me I hadn't let out in years. I felt needed again. "We'll be driving in Friday afternoon, Ma," he'd said on the phone. "Liam's got a school break, and he's been dying for your biryani. Dying for it." Those were his words. I held on to them like the good linen. I only brought out for company. I planned everything with care. I laid out the embroidered runner my mother stitched when I was a girl. The corners still curled from the last wash, and I pressed them smooth with my hands. I took out the china from the high cabinet, the one with the pale blue rims and the faint crack in the largest platter. I even aired out the guest room, tucking lavender sachets under the pillows, hoping the scent might say welcome back in a way my words never could. I boiled chickpeas for chaat, roasted the spices myself, not from a jar. I marinated the lamb overnight and made the dough for parathas from scratch, just like my mother used to. My fingers ached a bit from kneading, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that makes you feel useful. I even bought saffron, real saffron. It was expensive, too expensive if I'm honest. But I told myself, they're coming for you. They remembered. This is what matters. I used to have a small envelope tucked in the back of my recipe book. Birthday cash. A refund once, a 10-rupee note with my late husband's handwriting in the corner. I'd never spent from it. But that week I did. I walked to the spice store on Main Street, where the man behind the counter knew me by name. And I said, "The good one, please. The threads." He smiled and said, "Big occasion." I smiled back and said, "My grandson is coming home." When I got home that afternoon, I laid out the saffron in a tiny glass bowl on the windowsill so it could catch the sunlight. That's the trick for color. You let it bloom in warm water, not boiling. Too much heat ruins it. That's something I learned slowly with age. I spent the next day wrapped in preparation, not just cooking, but remembering. Remembering how Liam used to sit at the counter swinging his little legs while I rolled out dough. How he used to pinch bits of potato mixture from the samosas before I sealed the edges. He was only 6 then. I'd say, "You'll spoil your dinner." And he'd grin with that missing front tooth and say, "Just making sure it's safe." Noni, he was safe with me. Always. That Friday, I wore my softest cotton sari, the sea green one with a border of small stitched roses. I put on lipstick. Not much, just a rose tint, but enough to feel like I wasn't invisible. I even set my old tea set by the window table in case we sat for chai later and watched the light fade together like we used to. I sat by the front window, starting at 3, waiting for the sound of tires on gravel. The biryani was in the oven, resting under a foil dome. The parathas were stacked in a towel-lined basket. I checked the mirror twice, not to admire, just to be sure I looked like someone worth coming home to. They arrived an hour late. No one came to the door. I only knew they were here because I heard the car. I opened the front door myself, smiled too widely, and called out, "You're here." My son gave me a quick hug, one of those one-arm phone still-in-hand types. My daughter-in-law gave me a wave from the driveway. Liam didn't get out right away. When he did, he had his headphones on. When I called to him, he nodded, barely, looking up and said, "Hey, Nani," like I was someone he'd passed in a hallway. Still, I thought, he's tired. Teenagers are like that. They live inside themselves for a while. It's not rejection, it's growth. It's what I told myself. Over dinner, I ladled the biryani with care, making sure everyone got a little of the saffron crust at the bottom. The dum. It's the most flavorful part. I noticed my daughter-in-law pushing hers around the plate. Liam took a picture of his food, then barely touched it. My son looked at his phone between bites. No one said anything. No one asked how long. It took. No one asked if I was well. No one even said it was good. Finally, I said, softly, "It's the same recipe as always. You used to ask for it on your birthdays." Liam shrugged. He said, "It's kind of heavy," then laughed loud, too loud, and said, "Maybe I've evolved past nani-flavored things." I don't think he meant to be cruel. He was showing off, trying to be funny. Maybe he'd have said the same thing to a friend's grandmother. But the way my son chuckled and looked away, the way my daughter-in-law picked up her glass and changed the subject, that was when I felt something in me shift. It wasn't just that they didn't like the food. It was that the food no longer meant anything. I stood to clear the plates before they were even empty. My hand trembled a little as I reached for Liam's glass, and he didn't notice. He had already pulled his phone back out. He was watching something, laughing quietly to himself as I scraped the saffron rice into the sink. I didn't say anything. I just stood by the faucet, running warm water over the plates, and watched as golden strands of saffron swirled down the drain like threads I'd carefully pulled loose from a family tapestry. Later that night, I sat alone in my room, listening to the creak of footsteps above me, the guest room I'd readied with such care. I had folded the towels with a bit of lavender tucked inside. I had placed Liam's childhood book on the bedside table, but no one came down to say thank you. No one asked if I'd join them for tea or a late-night chat. I heard their laughter muffled through the ceiling and realized it had nothing to do with me. Not anymore. Still, I told myself, tomorrow will be better. It always takes them a day to settle in. I placed my lipstick back in its drawer and folded sorry over the chair. Hope is not always loud. Sometimes it's just the refusal to leave the guest room light off. It's a quiet placing of teaspoons beside teacups just in case. But that night, for the first time in many years, I felt like a visitor in my own story, and I wondered as I lay awake, listening to the laughter above, whether I had been preparing for a moment that had already passed me by. I used to keep the phone nearby, like a child with a worn toy, never far from reach. I didn't hover over it in desperation. No, but I made sure it was always charged, that the ringer was on, that the screen was clean enough to see the names when they flashed. When my son and his family drove away that Sunday, I stood in the doorway and waved until their car became a shimmer in the street's heat. Then I went inside and washed the sheets, refolded the towels, and returned the china to its shelf with a kind of reverence. Not sadness, just ... ritual. I told myself they'd call that night or maybe the next day, just to say they got home safe, just to say thank you. But no call came. It wasn't like them, not entirely. They used to be better about that. My son always sent a picture when they got home, Liam asleep in the back seat, or a shot of the sunset from the highway. This time, nothing. Silence. I waited 3 days before I called. It rang twice, then voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I thought, I'll try again tomorrow. I don't want to sound clingy. The next day, I tried his wife instead. She picked up, but sounded busy, like she was already looking past the call. "Hi, Ma, everything's fine, just chaotic. You know how it is." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Did Liam enjoy the food?" I asked gently. She paused. "Oh, he's picky these days. You know teenagers." Then she told me she had to go. There was a conference call and the doorbell and someone at the other line. It's always something. I hung up with a small breath held in my chest. I told myself they're just busy, not distant, just stretched thin. But slowly the silence between us grew teeth. Calls became brief, sometimes unanswered. Texts went blue and unread. When they did respond, it was with quick words. No warmth, no photos. "No, we miss you." The last time I saw my son's handwriting was in a rushed birthday card in January. It read, "Love, all of us." No names, not even Mom. That month, I noticed. Liam had unfollowed me on social media. It was a small thing. Tiny, really. But when you're invisible in the eyes of the people you raised, Even the smallest vanishings feel like wind slipping through old curtains, cold and hard to stop. I scrolled back through my old posts, wondering what I had done. Had I shared? Something embarrassing. Had I commented too often? Was I one of those cringy grandmothers now? It's the ones they mock in memes and group chats? I used to post pictures of my garden, the bougainvillea vines curling around the fence, or the old swing my husband built before he passed. Sometimes I'd post recipes, or my sewing. Nothing loud, nothing shameful. But in Liam's world, maybe that was too much. Asterisk. Or maybe I was too much. The days stretched. The months folded in, spring came, and I planted basil alone. I made tea for one and poured the second cup back into the pot. I wrapped a gift for Liam's birthday, a simple leather-bound journal, the kind he used to write stories in when he was younger. I tied it with twine and included a note. Your words matter. Never stop writing. I mailed it a week early. It was never acknowledged, not even a thank you text. Still, I waited. I remembered when he used to come over after school and ask if I'd read his news story, the one about a spaceship, or the one where I was the queen of a cinnamon island. I kept all those notebooks, every single one. They're still stacked in my dresser drawer, tied with a ribbon like treasure. One Sunday, I made his favorite halwa and sent a picture to the family group chat. Just the halwa. No message, no one. Responded. I could see they'd read it. The little blue check marks told me that. But no reply. That was the day I realized the worst kind of loneliness isn't when you're alone. It's when you're trying to reach someone who no longer reaches back. I started talking to myself more. I'd narrate while cooking, and now we add the turmeric. It's just a pinch or it'll overpower everything. Like I used to when Liam watched from the counter. It's made the kitchen feel less empty, less like a chapel to a memory. Sometimes I'd pretend I heard the doorbell or a knock, straighten my hair in the hallway mirror just in case. It was always the wind or the neighbor's cat thumping against the bins. I went to church more often, not for prayer, though I whispered a few, but for presence, familiar faces. Mrs. D'Souza, who always wore a hat 2 sizes too large. Father Benedict, who shook my hand with both of his, as if holding something fragile. He once asked how Liam was. I lied. Said, oh, he's fine. Studying hard. He smiled and I hated how good the lie felt. I began baking. More than I could eat. Dropped off muffins to the widow across the street. Made soup for the postman when he caught a cold. Not because I was being generous, really, but because it helped us still feel needed. Even in small, forgettable ways. One afternoon, I walked past a family in the park. A grandmother holding a toddler's hand, the child sticky with ice cream and joy. The woman looked tired but lit from within. I sat on a bench nearby and watched them until they disappeared behind the jacaranda trees. I didn't cry, I just sat there. Hands folded in my lap, wondering if my own family would remember that I was once that woman. That I once woke up early. To braid hair, to pack lunches, to iron school shirts, to read the same bedtime story. 3 times because someone didn't want to sleep without knowing the ending again. I was the axis their world spun on. But now, I was the pause between sentences, the background, the muted square on a video call if they remembered to include me at all. I started walking every morning, around the block. The school Liam once attended, the gate now closed with chains. Past the corner shop where I used to buy him candy and tell the cashier, he's my little prince. Past the old bookstore that closed 2 years ago, his favorite one. We bought a used copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and insisted we read it together. I walked because the silence inside the house was beginning to echo. Because the photos on the wall started to feel like strangers who just happened to look like people I loved. Because if I stopped walking, I feared I'd stop moving altogether. One evening, I opened the drawer beside my bed and found the voice recorder my husband used to keep. He'd once interviewed me for fun, asked how I made my tea. It's how I folded clothes, how I raised a child without breaking. I pressed play, his voice. Soft and amused. Tell me again, love. What's the trick to good biryani? My voice laughing. Quietly, You let it rest before serving. You give it time. Everything good needs time. I played that part 3 times, and then I closed the drawer. That night, I didn't message anyone. I didn't call. I let the distance breathe. Let it sprawl out across the house like an uninvited guest that had always been here, waiting to be acknowledged. Because somewhere between the saffron and the silence, I had begun to understand that I wasn't just being overlooked, I was being erased. One unchecked voicemail, one unread message, one forgotten birthday at a time. And even though I hadn't yet found the reason, the why behind the slipping away, I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that something had shifted. Something was coming. But this time, it would not be warmth. It would be revelation. It was the kind of quiet afternoon that doesn't expect anything from you. The sun filtered through, the kitchen window lighting up the dust in the air like gold flecks in water. I had made tea, cardamom, and a touch of honey, and was folding laundry at the table while it steeped. Towels, mostly. Ones no one used anymore, but I washed anyway, out of habit. The house felt still, not heavy, not light, just still. I hadn't planned to go online. I rarely do these days. But a neighbor had mentioned that the church newsletter had finally posted the community fair pictures on Facebook. I thought I might see myself in the background, helping at the raffle stand. I opened my laptop and clicked. Slowly. It's the way you do when you're not in a rush. I found the pictures, smiling faces. It's children's hands sticky with cotton candy. Father Benedict waving in a wide straw hat. No trace of me, but I didn't. Mind, I was there. I remembered. Knew what I brought. I was about to close the tab when I noticed a small red notification. A friend suggestion. The algorithm at work, always poking around in your life, offering you ghosts. It suggested I follow Liam.odd, I thought. I'd followed him before. He must have unfollowed me and made a new account. Or maybe he blocked me on the old one. Thought prickled. But I clicked anyway. His new account was public. The banner photo was him, standing on a dock with sunglasses and that confident tilt young people wear like perfume. His bio read finance major, future CEO, Courierverse. But culture proved. I read it twice. Courierverse. That wasn't a joke. That was a dismissal. A tiny betrayal cloaked in wit. I kept scrolling. There were pictures of parties, of sushi nights and ramen bowls with clever captions. Friends leaning on him, laughing. A birthday cake that wasn't mine. A trip to Singapore. When had they gone to Singapore? Then one photo stopped me, froze me. It was my son and daughter-in-law standing beside Liam in front of a new-looking apartment building. A banner behind them said, "Welcome to your new home, Liam." In glittery letters, I stared. He'd moved out. The caption said, "Couldn't have done it without the best parents ever." #grateful, #funded, and free #new beginnings funded, and free. The words circled my mind like wasps. I reached for the tea, now cold. I didn't sip it. I just held the mug like an anchor, something warm I could still trust. That night, pulled out the old envelope from my file cabinet, the one labeled Liam Education Fund. I'd been putting money into it for years, quietly, privately. After my husband passed, set aside part of the insurance money, even skipped a few of my own checkups to add a little more. It was meant for college, tuition, books, a better life, and last year, when my son had said, "Ma, can I take over managing it? It'll be easier for tax purposes." I'd trusted him. I'd handed over the bank documents, signed where he said, thinking, this is what mothers do. They trust. They step aside with grace. Now I was realizing what I'd stepped aside for. I logged into my banking portal. I had to reset the password. My fingers shook a little, not from age, from the dull, blooming weight of betrayal pressing against the walls of my ribs. When I finally got in, I saw the account name had changed. L&R Lifestyle Fund. L&R, Liam and Rachel, his girlfriend. I now understood. The girl I'd never met. The girl who posted photos of dim sum and joked in hashtags about winning at life. The fund was nearly empty. I checked the withdrawal history. furnishings, travel, a month's rent paid in advance, electronics, not tuition, not books. A small sound escaped me, not quite a gasp, not a sob. More like a sigh that had aged too quickly. I shut the laptop, closed my eyes. The world tilted in silence. They had used my love, my care, to buy themselves freedom from me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, rhythmically, like a lullaby meant for someone else. I thought of the time I'd given Liam my old cookbook handwritten pages, oil-stained corners, my mother's cursive swimming across the rice recipes. It smiled, nodded politely, and set it aside. I never saw it again. I thought of the way my daughter-in-law had once said, half laughing, "He's so modern now, Ma. He doesn't need all that traditional stuff." What they meant, I realize now, was he doesn't need you. I opened my voice recorder, the one I kept tucked in the nightstand, and spoke into it for the first time in years. Asterisk. I was the one who taught him what saffron was, how to bloom it in warm water so the color would stain the rice like sunlight in silk. I was the one who saved for him even when no one asked me to. I did it because I thought that's what family. Did we build safety for the ones we loved, even if they never knew we were the bricks under their feet? I paused. Then I said, but I see now I was only the step they used to climb. The next morning I dressed carefully. Ironed blouse, neat slacks, the kind of outfit people wear when they go to sign something that cannot be undone. I called Mr. Saeed, our old family lawyer. He answered like he always did, warm and slow. I told him I needed to come in. No, not next week, today. When I sat in his office, I showed him the withdrawal trail, the fund usage, the change of title. I told him everything in a tone that surprised even me, not shaky, not angry, just calm, like I was reading someone else's story. He listened, took notes, then leaned forward and said, "Would you like to regain full control of your accounts?" I nodded. "And your will?" He asked gently, "Do you want to revise it?" I looked out the window at a young couple crossing the street, hands laced, laughing into each other's shoulders. They reminded me of what I once believed my family would become, what I thought I'd be part of always. "Yes," I said. "It's time I wrote a version where I'm not erased." When I got home that day, the sun was just beginning to set. I made myself a cup of saffron tea just for me and sat by the window. The threads bloomed golden in the cup, unfurling like quiet resilience. I didn't post a picture. I didn't send a message. I simply sipped. And for the first time in months, stopped waiting for someone to notice. Because I finally had. There's a silence that arrives before you speak. It's the kind that hums behind your teeth like thunder, waiting for a sky to split. I felt that silence as I walked up the stairs to my son's house that Friday. A cloth-covered tin of homemade sweets tucked in my arms like a peace offering. Or maybe a reminder. Maybe both. The walk from the car to his front porch felt longer than it should have. The garden had changed, neater, more curated. There was no room for wild basil now, no patch where Liam once tried to grow sunflowers. With too much water and too little sun, the wind chimes were gone. The house looked like a model home, polished, closed. I rang the bell. His wife opened the door, phone in hand, smile already faded. "Ma, we didn't know you were coming." I stepped inside, called. No one picked up. She opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it again. She turned toward the kitchen. "He's working in the study." I stood for a moment in their tuck-quiet living room. There were pictures on the mantel, staged family portraits, smiles sharpened for lenses. I wasn't in any of them. I wasn't surprised when I knocked on the study door. My son looked up, surprised but not startled. His desk was clean, too clean. A framed photo of Liam and a paperweight with "Best Dad Ever" etched into it sat beside his laptop. He closed the screen. "Ma, what's going on?" I placed the tin on the desk between us. "I thought you might still like Basin Ledoux." He didn't reach for it. I sat. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Is something wrong? There it was. I looked at him for a long time. His face, once round with mischief, was now drawn with edges. Gray had crept into his beard, but he still carried himself like the boy who once stood on my kitchen chair to reach the cookie jar. Always reaching, never asking. I said his name softly. Then I saw Liam's post. His eyebrows lifted slightly. A flicker, that's all, but enough. I continued. The apartment. The furniture. The money from the fund. He looked away, exhaled hard through his nose. Ma. I raised a hand. You told me it would be for his education. Said you'd handle it. I trusted you. He stood, walked to the window. His tone shifted, that edge of defense rising. We needed to help him start his life. He's not a child anymore, and I am. I asked. He turned. No, but don't make this into a thing. It's just money, Ma. It wasn't just money. I stood, voice still low. It was sacrifice. It was skipped coats and canceled trips. It was me handing over my quiet comfort so my grandson could have more. He rubbed his forehead. You're overreacting. You're being ... dramatic. That word landed like a slap made of air. No bruise, but still bruised. I took a breath, steady and slow. I'm not here to argue. I just want to understand. He finally looked at me then. And what I saw wasn't guilt, it wasn't shame, it was exhaustion. Like I was a task he hadn't scheduled but now had to endure. Ma, he said, sitting again, his voice too calm. We're trying our best. You've always been so involved and we've appreciated it. But things are different now. Liam's grown. We have our own routines. It's not like before. What is it like now? He hesitated. It's just ... You can be a lot. You expect us to drop everything. You take things personally. You make food we don't even eat anymore, and then look wounded when no one finishes their plate. I stared at him. At the man I taught to tie his shoes. Who once ran through the rain to bring me a scarf I'd left behind. Who cried when he lost his first job and whispered, "Sorry I let you down." I'm into my neck like a child again. Now he sat across from me with rehearsed indifference, as though empathy was a limited resource he could no longer spare. And Rachel, he added, too casually, she feels like she's always being judged. I blinked, judged. I've never said a word against her. It's the way you look at her, he said, or the way you talk about the old ways, recipes, religion, traditions. It's guilt-tripping. She didn't grow up like you. She doesn't know how to connect with all of that with you. I sat down again. My knees ached. My heart more. Do you know, I said quietly, what I hear when you speak like this? He didn't answer. I hear that I am a burden, that my love is outdated, that my care embarrasses you. He opened his mouth, closed it again. It's not about the money, I said, voice now steadier than I felt. It's about being erased, bit by bit, day by day. A long silence fell between us. He looked toward the window again. We didn't mean to hurt you, he said finally. You just didn't think I'd notice. Another silence. I stood. I've already changed the fund access. I told him. I've adjusted my will. That's not why I came. He turned then, confused. Then why? 'Cause I needed to say this out loud to your face. Because silence is what you've given me, and I refuse to return it. I turned to leave. He didn't follow me in the hallway. His wife watched me with her arms folded across her chest, like I was a weather front she hoped would pass. As I reached the door, she said, he's under a lot of stress, you know? You come in here like this doesn't help. I met her eyes. You used to let me hold your baby so you could sleep, I said. Now you treat me like noise. She looked away. I stepped outside. The wind was sharp, but honest. I walked to my car with slow dignity, the kind that comes not from winning, but from knowing you did not bend where it mattered. When I reached home, didn't cry. I took off my shoes, placed the tin of untouched sweets on the kitchen counter, and poured myself a glass of water. Then I opened my drawer and took out the photo of Liam at 5 years old, holding a spoon too big for his hand and a bowl of my halwa in the other. I stared at his little face, so earnest, so unguarded, and I said aloud, "You will not use my love to fund your forgetting." That night, I made dinner for one. I sat at the table with the radio, playing an old ghazal in the background. I lit a candle not for ceremony, but for myself. The confrontation had come and gone, and all it left behind was clarity. They did not see me as a mother anymore. They saw me as a weight to be managed, a soft obligation easier to bear at a distance. But they had forgotten one thing. I still remembered who I was before them, and now I would begin to live like it. After the confrontation, I didn't slam any doors, didn't raise my voice, didn't cry in stairwells or speak ill of them at church. No one outside of that room would have known what had been said. But inside me, something closed like a heavy book, one I'd been rereading out of habit. Even though the ending had always left me hollow, the next morning I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for apologies. I made my bed with clean sheets and opened the windows wide. The sun streamed in and lit up the dust motes like sparks of something waiting. Not grief, not loss, something more deliberate. More mine, for most. Of my life, I had been defined by what I gave. My time, my patience, my recipes stitched with memory. My presence quietly tucked between helping hands and unconditional forgiveness. Now, I began the quiet work of reclaiming. I started with the house. It was never much by the world's standards. A modest 2-bedroom, peeling paint in the hallway, creaky tiles in the laundry room. But it was mine. Paid in full, years ago, with my late husband's steady labor and my own small sacrifices, the shoes I didn't buy, the vacations we skipped, the nights I took in extra stitching work after Liam had gone to sleep. For years, my son had assumed it would pass to him naturally. He'd mentioned it in passing, never asking, always assuming. "Once you're gone, Ma, we can turn the back garden into a studio for Liam. Make it his creative space." Gone. Like I was a placeholder, a prelude. I hadn't fought it then. I'd smiled, nodded, tucked the discomfort into the same drawer where I kept old keys and expired coupons. But now I opened that drawer and took it all out. I called the lawyer again, Mr. Saeed. He met me with gentle eyes and warm tea in his office. "I'd like to update the will," I said simply. He opened his notebook. "All right. Let's walk." Through it, I sat straighter. I'd like to remove my son and his family entirely, and the education fund. I want it dissolved. Whatever's left can go to a scholarship in my husband's name for a child who doesn't mock where they come from. He didn't flinch, just nodded and wrote it down. "I'd also like to give the house to someone else." "You have someone in mind?" I thought of my neighbor, Mrs. Nesreen, widowed young, raising 2 granddaughters on her own while working nights at the textile mill. She always brought me jasmine when mine wouldn't bloom, and once shoveled my driveway. In silence after a snowstorm. Double quotes, "Yes," I said. "Her," he looked up. "You know, this might come as a shock to your son." I smiled gently. "Let it." That weekend, I cleaned the house like I was staging it for myself. Not to impress, not to sell, but to make it honest again. I removed the family photos, the ones where I'd been cropped out emotionally long before they were ever printed. I packed up Liam's toys from the attic, the wooden train, the jigsaw puzzles with missing corners, and donated them to the local orphanage. I kept only one picture, the one where he was 3 years old, covered in flour and smiling at me like I had given him the whole world. I tucked it into my dresser drawer beside my bangles. Not to forget, just to remember who I once was, who I still was. I called a real estate agent, not to sell, but to understand. The house was worth more than I expected. Not millions, but enough. Enough to start again, to choose myself in a way I never had before. I began making lists, not of groceries or chores, but of places. Places I had once said maybe someday about. The rose gardens in Islamabad. The quiet town near the coast with a little artist colony. The small apartment complex I'd read about, built for independent seniors who still cooked, still danced, still lived like the clock had slowed to their rhythm, not the world's. I visited it. It was quiet, clean, a view of the hills, the manager. A warm woman named Fariha showed me around. There's a community kitchen, she said, but each apartment has its own. You can cook what you want. I smiled at that. That's the best sentence I've heard in years. She paused. You live alone? I live, I said. That's what matters. I signed the paperwork 2 weeks later, put down the deposit from my own account. No one helped. No one needed to. I didn't tell anyone either. I began packing slowly, room by room. Not just objects, but identity. I left behind the version of myself who always waited by the phone, who kept the extra teacup out just in case, who baked his apology. That version had earned her rest. As I wrapped my cerise in tissue paper, I found the pink one I'd worn the day Liam was born. The fabric still smelled faintly of rosewater and eucalyptus. I held it for a moment, then folded it with care. The reinvention wasn't loud. It didn't need banners or declarations. It was in the way I placed the house keys into an envelope, with Nesreen's name written neatly in ink. It was in the way I made my final tea in that kitchen, poured it into a chipped cup, and drank it slowly with the window open and the wind tugging gently at the curtains. On the day I moved out, I left. A note on the table, not for my son, for myself, it read. You were never too much. They were simply too small to carry all you gave. I placed it beneath the old wooden spoon I'd used since 1979, the one that never splintered, and I walked out. Not with anger, but with grace. Because reinvention is not revenge. It is reclamation. And I had begun. I didn't leave a forwarding address that was intentional. Not out of cruelty, though they might call it that, but out of necessity. Some disappearances aren't escapes, or quiet declarations. You can no longer reach me where you left me. The morning I moved, the sun broke through in strips across the front gate. I left my nameplate hanging untouched. Let them come looking if they wanted. Let the mailbox hold their delayed apologies and belated questions. I turned off my phone, not for a few hours or a weekend. I powered it down and left it in a drawer. At the back of my old kitchen cabinet, the one where I used to keep birthday candles and cards I'd written but never sent. I slid it between a bundle of rubber bands and the old charger cord I no longer needed. I bought a new phone, a new number, gave it to no one but the lawyer and the apartment manager. Not even Nasreen. She just smiled when I told her, eyes wide with understanding. They'll think I've gone. I said she poured me chai and replied, they never really saw you here anyway. At the senior apartment complex, everything was different. Not better in the way people mean when they say upgraded. There were no granite countertops or smart lights. But better in the way that the silence was mine. The balcony overlooked a narrow walking trail. And I spent hours watching the same magpie visit the same railing every morning. I named her Amina. She didn't mind my presence. I decorated slowly. No family photos, no past. Just soft fabrics, clean lines, warm yellow bulbs, and shelves filled with books I'd never had. Time to finish. I put up a framed quote above my bed. Something I once heard in a film but never forgot. She left before she was left behind. I thought they might try to find me. For a while, I checked the mailbox in the lobby each morning with a tightness in my chest, expecting a letter, a note, even a forwarded bill. But there was nothing, just grocery circulars and real estate flyers, not addressed to me. I suppose it was easier for them not to look, or maybe they did try, called the old number, rang the bell of the house that no longer belonged to me. Perhaps stood on the empty porch wondering why the curtains were gone. But I would never know. I had vanished from the version of their world that expected me to always be there. I didn't block them on social media. I deleted my accounts entirely. Let them post what they wanted, caption their lives with filtered joys and curated milestones. I no longer needed to witness the erasure in real time. I was no longer part of their performance. One day, while sweeping the hallway of my apartment. I ran into a woman named Mrs. Khan. She wore a deep purple shawl and carried a small potted basil plant. "You're the quiet one," she said, smiling. I smiled back. I used to be loud in invisible ways. She nodded like she knew exactly what I meant. And then she said gently, "You're welcome to sit with us by the terrace this evening. We do nothing in particular. Just ... sit." I went. There were 4 of them, women like me, some widowed, some never married. Some left behind in ways I didn't need to ask about to understand. They shared almonds and dates and laughed softly. We didn't speak of our children, not once. Only recipes, poems, weather, dreams. That first evening, someone read aloud a verse by Parveen Shakir, "Who listens to the silence of a woman's bones." We all nodded. The next week, I cleared out my email. Years of old threads, family updates, school fundraisers, forwarding chains filled with GIFs and emojis. I archived them all, not as an act of rage. As an act of space, I made room for new kinds of messages. I started writing letters, handwritten, not to send. Just to say what I needed. "Dear Liam, I held your face in my hands the first time you cried. You fit into the crook of my arm like breath. I would have walked into fire for you, and now I walk away instead. Because even love must have a spine. Dear son, you will tell people I left. That I broke ties, that I chose silence. But the truth is, I stopped feeding the version of me you preferred, the one who said yes with her hands while your words cut her in half. Dear me, you were never a ghost. You were the foundation. And you don't need permission to rebuild." I burned those letters in a small clay bowl on the terrace. The smoke drifted upward, fragile and final. The other women watched without asking. That was the gift of my new life. No one needed explanations. Some afternoons I visited the community library, sat in a sunlit corner and read aloud to myself, just to feel the rhythm of my voice again. I picked up a book on women who reinvented themselves. At 70. I wasn't quite there, 68 and a half, but close enough. The chapter titles were absurdly triumphant. How I Climbed Kilimanjaro at 73. My Second Wedding. My Real Self. I didn't need that. My story wasn't meant for headlines. It was meant for the small pages written in the margins of a quiet life. A woman makes lentil soup with too much cumin. A woman walks alone at dusk and feels no fear. A woman cuts ties not with scissors, but with silence. A woman breathes deeply, fully, without waiting for anyone to ask how she is. Weeks passed, then months, and one day I got a letter in the mail. Not from them, not my son, not Liam, but from the school where I'd redirected the remaining education fund. Scholarship had been awarded to a girl named Ara, first in her family to attend university, studying literature and psychology. Her thank you letter was clumsy and beautiful, written in pink ink with stars around the margin. She ended it with, "I won't waste this, I promise. You're part of the reason I believe women like me can matter." I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. She didn't know me, and yet she saw me. That evening, I made biryani for myself. Just a small pot, no audience, no performance. Used real saffron, let it bloom in warm milk. When the dum rose in the steam, I smiled. I set one plate, sat at one place, no one to impress, only myself to nourish. And outside, the wind pressed gently against the balcony door like a hand reminding me, you are still here. You are still yours. Because the vanishing wasn't about absence. It was about return. Not to them, to me. 1 year later, the house feels lived in. Not filled, not crowded, lived in. The windows bear the gentle dust of days I didn't bother to polish. The bookshelf leans slightly to one side, and I've let it stay that way. The basil on the balcony blooms and wilts on its own rhythm. I don't scold it for growing sideways. I let it choose its direction, like I did. I don't mark time by phone calls anymore, or holidays, Or who remembers my birthday? I mark it by how the morning sun warms the tea in my hand before I take the U. First sip. By the way, my breath steadies itself when I step onto the trail just after dawn. By the pages in the notebook I now fill with things I never said out loud. Memories. Recipes, small brave thoughts. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Last winter I went on a trip. Alone, I booked a small cottage near the sea. Took the train. With a suitcase no heavier than I could carry. I wore my red shawl, the one my husband once bought me when we had no business spending on softness. I walked along the sand and let the wind tangle my hair. I didn't take pictures. I didn't check the weather. I let it rain. I let it shine. And every evening I cooked something small and tender. A curry for one. A prata folded with ghee. A bowl of lentils that reminded me of my mother's hands. I didn't miss anyone. I missed the version of myself who once waited. To be missed. But even that feeling passed, like a bird that lands. Then lifts off again without apology. Back home, the letters still come from the scholarship program. Ara writes twice a term. Her handwriting's gotten steadier. She sent me a photo this time, her at a podium, holding a small award. She wore red lipstick. She said in her letter, "You once told me women can be strong in quiet ways. I hope I'm making you proud." She will never know the full story, what that money was meant for, who it was taken from, and how it was reclaimed. But she doesn't need to. She is the continuation of something better. She doesn't carry my grief. It's only my choice. My son hasn't written. Not a letter. Not a card. Not a knock on the door. Once I imagined he might try. That he'd show up here, confused, hollowed by absence. That he'd bring Liam and say, "We were wrong, but now I know peace doesn't need a witness. It doesn't ask for permission, and some silences are more sacred than any apology." Liam did reach out. Lynn through a mutual friend. A message relayed. Secondhand, he wants to know if you're okay. I said nothing in response. I didn't ask him why it took a year. I didn't ask why the hands that took so easily now trembled to give. I simply sat with the knowledge that I was okay, not in spite of them. But because I had left a place where I had needed them to be okay, there's a strength in that. A woman I now sit with on the terrace most evenings, Golzer Auntie, we call her, told me once, "We are the daughters of women who folded pain into roti and fed it to a world that never said thank you." She looked out at the hills, then added, "But we don't have to do that anymore, so we don't. We sip tea. We knit. We argue about old films and swap remedies for aching joints. We laugh more than I ever imagined I would at this age. Not because everything is healed. Because laughter stopped asking for permission. One day last week, I was walking down the hallway when I heard a knock on the common room door. A young girl stood there, maybe 16, a clipboard in hand and hope in her voice. She was collecting oral histories, stories from women in the building. She asked if I'd be willing to share mine. I said no at first, then, after a breath, I said, "I won't share the one you expect. But I'll give you the recipe for my biryani, the real one, with the saffron that blooms in warm milk." She looked puzzled, but she took the page I wrote for her, careful cursive. Every step of the layering, the timing, the way to listen for the steam as if it were sacred. Maybe it is. That evening, I cooked it again, not for a son, not for a grandson, just because I wanted to taste it on my own tongue. Because it was mine before it was ever theirs. Because the rituals we give away too often become ruins. And I've started keeping my rituals for myself. The rice was soft, the bottom crisped just enough. The saffron bloomed golden, blooming like an echo in the pot. I lit a candle. I plated it gently. I sat by the window with my shawl draped over my shoulders, the cool air slipping under the fabric like an old friend. And as I ate, I thought not of what I'd lost, but of who I'd become in the absence. No one clapped. No one said thank you. But in the silence, it was music. A music that had no chords but all the harmony I needed. I had survived being unloved by those I loved most, and I had not turned bitter, I had simply turned inward. And in that turning, found myself again. Not the version who served until she was invisible, but the woman who now serves only those who see her, including herself, including this moment, including this soft golden peace that no one gave me. I built it, and I live in it now.